All right.
Should be there.
Fantastic. Well, thank you everyone for joining. And as I mentioned previously, I've had a cold, and so I may cough a little bit, but I apologize. So I'm Tim Henning. I've been a developer for now 25 plus years and also an analyst. And I'm a big Power BI enthusiast. And recently I have come up against, a situation where I thought, by now, Power BI should have a robust way of version controlling your projects. I'm like, this is nuts because from my experience as a developer, you need version control for several good reasons. One is you need to track your history of your changes and see your comments. Because if you're trying to transition your work to somebody, instead of sitting there trying to remember through a host of emails and notes all over the place, why not just say, go look at my repo. You'll see all the check-ins, checkouts, and the comments, and it gives them a leg up. Also, it gives you that centralized backup. So I don't know if you've ever had the lovely experience of working on a project and then 2 days later you realize you made a huge error. And you're like, you know what? I just want to roll back. When you have version control, you have that capability. Instead of looking through your folder structure on your local hard drive of, report underscore one, report underscore two, copy of report. If you if Power BI starts to take off in your organization, you also find that it's probably a good idea to have someone check your work. And maybe not everyone should have access to production, deploying to production, especially as the organization starts to really rely on those ports. Better to have a second pair of eyes. And so that's where a good change management process comes into play. And also, as you start to mature your processes, you're going to want to start getting into a continuous integration and continuous deployment set of pipelines. Something that perhaps maybe can validate your work, test it before it gets published out to production. But for me, the core behind all of this is as I'm working on many different reports within my team, wouldn't it be nice to be able to delegate work off to another colleague? Hey, you work on this report, I'll work on this report, and then we'll merge our changes together and be able to push this out to production faster. Or as you're working on these report changes, maybe you have a production issue. Someone else can handle the production issue, check in their changes, and then when you're done with your new feature, your new set of report changes, you can merge those back in. Well, prior versions of Power BI made it extremely difficult, if not impossible, to do that. A lot of it was either manual updates, like, oh, you updated it in production. Okay, well, what did you change? So identifying changes, very, very troublesome. So to me, that's really the big story behind Microsoft project files. So continuing on. And if any of you have worked with Power BI long enough, and those of you who are brand new to it, just wait. That dialogue is going to come up in front of your face one day. And when it happens, sometimes you don't have a lot of time to figure out what caused it. You want to know as quickly as possible what happened, especially if it was working. Sometimes you have a report that was working fine. It's works like clockwork. Then someone made a change unbeknownst to you and broke the report. Having version control, being able to track history, is really, really important. Oh, and you may not even have broken the report, but all of a sudden the performance is just terrible, right? And we all know that when users experience reports that are performing poorly, they don't use them. So moving on. Now, I'm going to be talking primarily, or I'm going to be focused on the report definition and the dataset definition. But I want you to keep in mind that when you're talking about version control and your projects, you also need to think about the serving layer, app and dashboards, the data flows, because those are all part of the equation when you're serving data up to your users in Power BI. So I don't know if you've had a chance, but maybe Kevin, I don't know if you've have a Azure Data Studio presentation, but that is a great way of version controlling SQL objects that are required by your Power BI reports. For those of
Yeah,
you who,
I totally agree. I don't think we've done that type of SQL project, and stuff like that before, but might be something in the future.
yeah,
Let me see if
I got one in the hopper for that. Oh, see, someone has a report that's already broken.
You have to use your words.
All right.
Use your words. No shouting.
I'm looking to see who it is. If you're not talking, I got it. I'll mute them.
Okay.
Okay, got it.
Great. So when we talk about Power BI version control, as soon as you say that, based on previous history, you're talking lots of money because you're immediately thinking premium capacity. You're thinking deployment pipelines. You think, I've got like 100 users. We're on Power BI Pro. Maybe it's just me. I'm trying to get adoption within my organization. I can't go to my boss and say, "Oh, I need $5,000 per month." So that is no longer the case. You have a viable solution. So I thought before we jump into the solution, let's talk about what you currently have as far as file types and report types. So we have the PBX file, which contains both report and data set. And sometimes it serves a purpose. You don't feel like breaking out your data sets into like a common data set and separating it out to a report. That happens, right? And then you have situations like I mentioned where you have a common data set. We have multiple reports that are actually connecting to a single common data set that's been validated. And then you have a Power BI template. So that contains your report metadata, your data model definitions, but it has no data. And it's a single report file. So let's talk about the Power BI version control options that we are normally used to working with. So, excuse me, you typically would save your PBX file or your PBIT file to something like a SharePoint or OneDrive. And it's great. It's easy to implement. People understand it. They go to a document library, they upload the file, they can put it in the history comments, which is great. And you know what? I don't need to know any Git commands. It just works, right? Well, the con is that you're saving a binary file up there. So you have no ability to do any kind of breakdown and detailed commit comparisons. Did you change a table or did you update a report visualization? I don't know. It's just one big file up there. So you still have that problem of, okay, something broke. Let me download 3 or 4 of these versions and do comparisons and try to figure out what went wrong, what changed, right? The other option you have is using Git, right? And saving your binary files to Git. Well, the pros is that now that works for your Power BI premium capacity deployment pipelines, yay. But the cons are, again, binary file. No way of figuring out any kind of details of what happened, right? What changed. And Git was not really meant, the repositories, to store large file formats. And if you have certain Power BI project files, we all know that they can grow pretty quickly depending on how many different tables you're importing. So again, that's not the ideal situation. Custom scripting. So, people kind of are like, you know what, I got this. I'll write my own super script, and what it'll do is take my PBX file and it'll save it as a zip and extract it out, or I'll use XMLA to go up and get the definition of that file. And of course, if you're using XMLA, guess what? You're already into premium, right? You need a premium license. Or you're like, well, I'll just use REST API and PowerShell scripts. Whenever you're into that custom script territory, now you have not only your PBIX file, your reports to maintain, now you got to find someone that can maintain these scripts. And the likelihood that a content author is going to fire off this script that's going to break this apart, and they're going to then take all of those files and upload it, or allow the files to be uploaded to a particular repository, is pretty low. I found that I'm lucky if I can get people to take their PBX files and save them to SharePoint. All right. So one of the other things that you got to think about is when you're saving your PBX file, you're not only saving the model, but you're also saving the data. So let's say that all of a sudden there's a new data security policy that comes out that says, thou shalt not include product supplier cost or employee performance ratings in the reports. Well, if you've already spent months and months saving those PBX files to SharePoint with that data that was not supposed to be there, guess what you have to do? You have to now delete all of your artifacts, your history of artifacts. And now you have no more history. Not a great solution. So hopefully I convinced you that you need to skip saving the data with the report, and you need to focus on managing the metadata. And for this talk, we're talking about data sets and reports. Well, some might say, well, Tim, we've always had the capability to extract out the data set schema and save it to a version control repository. Yes, you have. And if we look at this, you can take Tabular Editor, fantastic tool, by the way, and you could save your model out to a BIM file. So let's take a look at the BIM file. So here's our BIM file. It has all of the things that we really care about. It has the table names. It has the Power Query M code in there for us. It has DAX, queries in there. All of that, fantastic. The problem is that I find is that it's not broken out to, oh, here are my tables. Oh, here are my DAX measures. Here, as Power Query. I got everything in one giant file, right? And this is a miniature report I'm working on. I'm already at 17,000 lines within the BIM file. What happens if this becomes a mature report? This is going to be really unwieldy to work with. So what's the other option? Well, in Tabular Editor, you can, Tabular Editor, boom. You can save it to a folder. So, okay, great. I'm gonna save my work to a folder. What's that give me? Look at that. it's broken out all of my tables if I wanted to. I can, look at this. I can look at the partitions, columns. This is what I'm talking about. I can see individual discrete changes if I wanted to. All right. So what's the downside to using Tabular Editor? Well, the downside is that when we're talking about collaboration, Kevin can't make an update to the tables. I can't make an update to the tables and then merge back together and convert it back to a PBIX. So, wow, I get the version control that I need, but not really. So that's really kind of a half a solution also. What about the report definition? You could take their PBIX, save it as a template, and then change the file extension to a zip and extract. Well, what's that get you? Hey, I like this. I got my metadata, I got my data model here. And not only do I have my data model, I have my layout. See what that looks like. See, isn't that easy to read?
All right, you
But
got
here's
me
all.
laughing there.
Good. I need someone to laugh at my ridiculous jokes. Here are all your visualizations and your properties. Not only that, here are my JPEGs. So if I wanted to, I can now version control my data model, my report definitions, as well as supporting images. So there it is. There's everything I needed. Problem is that nobody in their right mind is going to, every single time they want to commit, is convert from a PBIX to a template file, rename it, extract, do all this nonsense, and to top it all off, it's not supported by Microsoft. So you go in there and futz around, that's on you. Microsoft reserves the right to change it, and your whole process no longer works. So, what is one to do? Saving a PBX file to SharePoint, OneDrive, it's adequate, but it's not a great solution. It's really a short-term solution. You need to be able to see both your Power BI report and dataset discrete changes. You need to be able to merge changes from other developers or yourself back into your main production file. So how do you save your changes as text files? And I recommend that. I keep saying text files. You're like, why text files? Because Git has so many built-in tools to do comparisons and manage text files. That's where the Power BI project file type comes into play. It automatically separates the report definitions and the dataset definitions, which is what we needed, and the files are stored as ASCII file types. So now you have that ability to do comparisons. Not only can you do comparisons against your data sets and your report definitions, you have the ability to version control your static resources. Now, I am going to warn you. I just checked up on their website, and as of the article, August 25th, 2023, still in preview. But I have been using this now for a month and a half, and I love it. All right, so let's explore the Power BI project file tab, shall we? So I have saved a PBX file. I opened up your PBX file, and all I've done is done a save as. And what that gives me is this nice file here, this PBIP file. So whenever I want to open up this project again, all I gotta do is double click that and it opens up my report. So if we actually look at this within Visual Studio Code, what does that file contain? Well, interesting enough, it just contains a path to the actual report shortcut. All right, let's look at that. Definition of my Power BI report file. Let's open that up. That is a relative path to the data set. Interesting enough, think about this. For those of you that separate your reports from your data sets, now you can have multiple reports point to a relative path to a single data set if you wanted. Just saying. And then if I look at my images, lo and behold, here are my images. Let's take a look at the data set. We've seen that before. That is our BIM file. Now, for some of you, you're saying, well, Tim, you told me the BIM file is not ideal. For those of you that already have deployment pipelines that are using tabular editor for validation, for example, you don't have to worry about it. This is a tried and true file format, and you can keep those pipelines going because Microsoft is saying we will support the BIM file format. Let's see here. Yep, covered that. Oh, and the report definition file, I forgot to cover that. And here are your visuals, all your properties related to your visuals. So now if somebody changes a position, changes a sort order of a visual, you can now see that. It's no longer hidden from you. Oh, before I forget, it's really important to see that when you create when you select or save as a project file type, it also gives you a git ignore file. At least I believe it does. I don't know. If it doesn't, you want to create this. So what this does is says, hey, make sure that when you're ready to check in to get your repo, don't include your connection information. This file here, this is your data. So don't check in the data. The one that I've also added is if I have my PBX file in my working directory, don't check that in either because it defeats the purpose. So the only thing we're checking in to get are the definition files. All right. So we covered that. So again, tables, relationships, Power Query, DAX. So what would be a possible upgrade flow? So again, you would open up your PBX file. You'd come here to options. Come here to preview features, and just make sure that this check mark is checked, where it says Power BI project file save options. And then what I would do is save it as a project file type. And again, it'll give you the pointer, the git ignore file, and these two folders. And again, the git ignore, it prevents you from saving the data in your connection information. Step 3, you want to go to GitHub. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with GitHub, go to repositories, hit new repository, create your repository name, make it private or public. I've already done it. So it then creates your repository for you. And then what you can do is copy this path and then pick your location and just say git clone. And it'll then clone your repository here, and then you could put your files in that repository. It's really simple. Adding files, get integration. All right. So step 4. We no longer need to do this, by the way. As of recently, I think the last month, previously you had to make your edits within PBX file, then save it as a project file type, and then make your commits. You no longer have to do that. The reason why you had to do that was that if you opened up a project file type, you could not publish your changes to the Power BI service. That's no longer the issue, because now they've made it possible for you to work entirely within the project file and then publish as you normally do with a PBX file. And for those of you that are not familiar with Get, so normally if you make changes, let's see here. So essentially, if you make changes here, they show up here as changes. You can then stage your changes. You can also come here, say git add, and add any additional files. You can then commit your changes, put it in your message, and then you do a git push. Once you do a git push, you can now see all of your changes here. So here's my initial set of changes that I committed. And now you can see here, I can make changes and publish them to the Git repo. And here you can see that I changed the title on a report from new 2 to new 3. All right, so we already covered this. We no longer have that limitation. Now, if you wanted to then merge other developers' changes, so I'm on the main branch here. So if I come to report and say I open up the definition and I come down here, so now I've entered my changes here. Now what that represents is another developer has made changes that I don't have locally. So I can come here. Where did I put that? Sorry.
While he's looking for that, this would be a good time. Anybody got any questions? Any clarifications needed? Thoughts?
There we go.
Quiet Tuesday.
So if I hadn't made any changes, I could actually pull down the changes and I can actually merge these in. So what does that give me the ability to do? I can now branch if I want to. I can create a story off of my GitHub here, my repo. Come here, you can say, here's my story. I can work off of this branch. I can merge it back in. Gives me all kinds of possibilities that I did not have previously. For those of you that are not familiar with GitHub, so if you want to switch, Visual Studio makes it really easy. You can come here, look at different branches, and change. So version control patterns. Well, I would say it depends on your needs, but I would definitely probably steer clear of creating a Git repository for every single report. Perhaps maybe creating a repository for your workspace, and then for all of the reports that are within that workspace, that might be a good pattern to follow. It seems to be what Microsoft follows as a pattern for their deployment pipelines. You also need to think about your, excuse me, your security needs. So for those of you that may have one giant workspace, maybe this might be a good idea or time to create different workspaces depending on the data that is contained for each of those reports and data sets. That way you can set up your repository security the same way as you have for your workspace. All right. And let's talk about, sometimes you need the ability, get rid of all this. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity or come across a situation where you have two report versions on your local drive and you're like, oh, I made a mistake. I've updated both of the files. Which one has the changes I need? And so I can transfer them over to the file. So in Visual Studio, if you break them out to project file types, you can come here and compare the two different versions and see what the changes were. And you can say, oh, well, here's the change I made. I get it. Now I can merge those changes together and get rid of the copy. Or I can actually see, for example, if a colleague has made updates to my file, what do I need to merge together? So that's a manual way of doing it outside of Git. Recently, I came across a situation where Microsoft, when I was using Power BI RESTful APIs, they put a space in the column name, and a report that was once working, all of a sudden, I couldn't even open the report. It says unable to open report. But because it was not a PBIX file, it was a Microsoft project file, I can go directly to that specific problem file, make the update. I got rid of the space, and then I was able to open up the Power BI report. So that, to me, is a huge benefit of switching.
And
All right.
what you just shared there is an important, piece of information for people migrating over to this. Because I had the same thing happen to me. I had a model that had a space at the end, like you're highlighting with the blue part here. And I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't get it to open, and I had to do the same thing. I had to go in. It took me a while to figure out that that was, well, here you're seeing the I don't know myself, I didn't see the quotes, those double quotes for whatever reason. So it took
Mm-hmm.
me a bit to kind of figure out what was going on, and then I went ahead and fixed it. But you're spot on there. So that's an important lesson. We have somebody with their hand raised here.
Sure.
So Ahmed, you had a question?
Yeah, in the previous slide where you diffed two source files, I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to ask how reliable that's been. I've heard rumors that the layout of the file can change dramatically upon open and resave, and because of course the objects in the file could be in different orders, and that doesn't necessarily break it, right? So have you found that it's quite reliable to do, because it's basically doing a line by line diff, right? In looking at versions of your project files?
So far, yes. The ones that I've run into trouble with is sometimes when everything's on the same line. Normally, it's nicer when the changes are on different lines. Same name, but different properties, for example. But so far, I haven't come across a situation where it's kicked me in the shins when it's moved the properties around to different sections of the file. Now,
Okay,
not to say that it won't in the future, but so far it hasn't hurt me yet.
awesome.
And of course, if you paste it in, you could also do, Control F and see if these unique names and numbers show up somewhere else, and you're like, oh, okay, wait a second here. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right. Existing Power BI service get works integration. So there, like I said, Microsoft has some solutions out there. If you have a workspace that is under premium capacity, you could do Git integration. One of the things that you're going to be careful about is the limitations. Make sure you review them and it works for you. So I was looking at some of the limitations, and for me, it sounds like they need to kind of still work on it a little bit before I commit to, using that kind of a feature. So beware. Apps and dashboards. Again, for those of you that are using APIs, I recently have been checking to see if they've changed. They haven't. You can't really change the, you know, a- you know, the app properties of who is an audience for an app, et cetera. So if you want to do a full-blown deployment pipeline, that's something you're going to need to have to consider, is how do you handle that? I do love the Power BI REST APIs and commandlets. One thing I did notice, just on a side note, this is not really for this kind of presentation, but the commandlets are not as powerful as the Power BI REST APIs for those of you who are just starting on that journey. The Power BI service deployment pipelines right now, Gerhard Bruckel, if you watch his presentation, he says, quote unquote, they're not ready for enterprise as an enterprise solution. And his main points is you have a dev, test, and prod. And if part of the deployment as you're running through it, it fails, midway through, there is no rollback feature. And I don't know if any of you have ever experienced a partial deployment. It is terrible to fix by hand. So, in summary, I think the community has been waiting for this for a very, very long time. And I think that the Power BI project file type really accomplishes the really important priority requirements of being able to break down your Power BI project files into discrete text readable components that make it suitable for integration to Get and all kinds of Azure pipelines. As one of the users pointed out, may not be perfect, but I think it's a huge leap in the right direction. And I personally am using it. So I'm hoping in the near future that, maybe October, November, that they announce it as GA, but we'll see. Now, any questions?
Okay, I'll shoot this, Zaman. So it seems like that version control was like the #1 most asked question when people would get into Power BI. At least when I started attending things, people would ask this. It seemed like almost every week, like on Guy in the Cube, or somebody would ask about version control. So my question is, what is the new #1 thing going to be?
Oh boy, this is my #1. I have to think about that one. I don't know, Kevin, do you got a #1? Something I can jump off of?
Well, I know there's some people out on social that have been trying to make some things the #1, but I don't want to give it enough airtime here. It's a whole thing.
Yeah, I personally, my new #1, I love the analyze this. So for any of you, do you guys all understand what I'm talking about for charts? Okay, so do I have a chart that will? Right now I have just a bunch of client files that I can't show you. but essentially what you can do on do I have any? No, not in this one.
While
For
you're
stack
looking,
charts or
while you're
bars.
looking, Leslie's #1 is when do we get this in GCC? That's always the government people is always their #1. When is anything available in GCC?
So
Sorry,
GCC is the government. Is that
the government?
Leslie?
Yeah.
Leslie uses a lot of acronyms. So the government cloud. And then Leslie, your other comment, GHES, is that a GitHub something? And ADO, I'm guessing, is, I don't know what used that comment from earlier. Does everybody know what that means?
ADO is Azure DevOps. Let's see,
Mhm.
unless I'm missing something, fully functional CI/CD you need. GitHub
GitHub Enterprise. Okay, that was a
Enterprise.
guess. All right. If you're on peak, what does that mean on peak? I feel like a noob. What does it mean to be on peak?
If you're
I've never heard that before.
basically on-prem, doesn't do it.
Oh, okay. Cool.
I mean, I'm curious. I haven't been paying attention. did people find this interesting? Um, is this something that you would use on a day-to-day basis? Did anyone see any use cases where they might use the comparison now that you can break things down to tables? All right,
Yeah,
so I got
we're seeing the thumbs up now. A lot of people are always shy and that don't want to come off and talk. They feel like they're interrupting. I wish they would, but yeah.
Yeah,
What?
Tim,
You wish for what? Sorry.
Yeah, Tim, I mean, it's definitely something that we're looking at doing in our company, because we've just been using the PBEXs, and I've been wanting to do version control on stuff because we've lost reports, got corrupted, they've gone missing, whatever side of things. And it's something that I'm really wanting to look at. And then obviously when project files came out, I just haven't had the time to sort of look into it. So this has been my sort of first time of sort of seeing, oh, this is what I want to do. Because the thing is, though, is that a lot of the time is that I've seen mentioned of, oh yeah, version control, but just talking about it in terms of integration with DevOps, and not sort of thinking, well, in actual fact, there's a lot of small businesses that don't have DevOps, or they've only got limited licenses, or there's or from a financial point of view, whereas they've got GitHub. Let's make use of it.
Yeah, and I tried to speak to not only the two people in a small department using Power BI, but speak to anyone that all the way up to enterprise. So if you wanted to, you can do deployment pipelines. You don't even need premium capacity. If you have Azure DevOps, you can write your own pipelines to move. You can create your own agent and your own tasks to upon check-in, do a best practice check, using Tabular Editor. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Daniel's presentation. It's amazing what he has come up with. So I might consider doing that myself. So when I do a check-in, it's then going to take my files and do a best practices check against it, and say, hey, probably should fix these before pushing it out to production.
Yeah, I think I heard of somebody one time even like blocking their Azure DevOps if the best practice had a certain level error, like it violated one of the best practices for level 1 or something like that, then the deployment would fail.
I hadn't seen that as that side of things, in terms of that you could run that before committing it.
Yeah, you're basically running Tabular Editor 2 in a command line mode.
Okay.
And I think Grayskull, I think Johnny put out a video on something like that.
Oh, it did. Okay, I'll have a look at Johnny's website and have his YouTube and have a look and see.
So Tim, did we hit the end? I know we got into some questions and you stopped presenting.
We did hit the end.
Perfect.
I hit the summary. Hopefully everyone found it useful. You were able to take something from it. I'm happy to answer any emails or any additional questions if you need it.
Wonderful. Anybody have any other questions before I turn off the recording? Anything else you want to speak of? Let me go ahead and turn off the recording.